Welcome back. We're going to look at the lesson notes from Tuesday, the 2nd of June 2020. We started out looking at some concession usage and we introduced this idea of using concession, which you can see over in our other slide. Using phrases like while I accept that. Just be careful there. Some of our students tend to sometimes say accept. You tend to overpronounce the A like an O. So accept. So while I accept that, although I acknowledge that, while I appreciate that, while I understand that, although I appreciate that, you can use those phrases. Then we partner them with phrases like I would point out that, I think it is fair to say that, I would have to say that, and then these phrases I would have to stress that, I would have to highlight that, I would have to emphasize that. These are verbs that can be added when you think this is a much stronger point and you're making it stronger. So these were introduced by some of our students, which is fantastic, on our online class in the last lesson. And they're really good. They're really, really useful, natural phrases that native speakers use all the time. It's worth considering that, it's worth bearing in mind that, and it's worth taking into account that. These phrases use it's worth, and if you use it's worth, the verb that comes next must be verb ing. So it's worth considering that, it's worth bearing in mind that, it's worth taking into account that. We also talked about the pronunciation of appreciate. It can be appreciate or appreciate. Okay. We talked about other words that are sometimes mispronounced. Lesson. It's not lesson, it's lesson. Okay. And that's also a verb, lesson. To lessen something is to make it less. But here we're talking about the pronunciation of the word lesson, like English lesson or English class. Students tend to say lesson. They overpronounce that. It's lesson. Just like other words we talked about before about this word chocolate. In English it's pronounced chocolate. Okay, chocolate. And then we talked about a few other minority and minor, but it can be minority, but it's never minor. Okay, it's always minor. Aluminium in Ireland and England, and then Ireland and Britain, and then aluminum in America and Canada. I don't know what they say in Australia. I'd have to ask an Australian and a New Zealander to ask what they say. We say oregano, and our American and Canadian cousins say oregano. And then we also made the point about all right and already, that comes from another language, and when people went over to the States in immigration, they brought some of their points with them from their own language. So phrases that might have been in Polish, I suspect, came into English usage in the great melting pot of the United States. Paddy wagon is, we talked about that in class. We said that paddy wagon is originally the name of the police truck that would be sent out to arrest people in America. And so many of the policemen in America at the time were Irish that when they'd arrive and arrest a lot of the people who were causing trouble, who also happened to be Irish. So all of the people in the police truck were from Ireland. And unfortunately, St. Patrick is our patron saint. That's not unfortunate, but because Patrick is a very popular name in Ireland, the short form of Patrick is Paddy, and sometimes Paddy was used as a kind of pejorative expression towards Irish people. It depends who says it. If we say it ourselves, we don't mind. If our English neighbours say it, well, we don't take that too kindly. So it depends who says it. But the paddy wagon was the police truck that arrested people. Then some of our students added a few slang words of their own. They refer to the po-po, and this is the kind of gangster rap expression for police in America nowadays. Then we came up to other phrases that can sometimes be offensive in a conversation. He claims that. Now, if you say that in front of the person who's saying it, they might be offended because it suggests, I don't know, maybe he's lying, maybe he's not. If the person isn't there, obviously they can't hear you saying it. But if I said in front of my brother, if my brother said, I spent €200 on gifts, and I said, well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, then obviously he'd be offended by my doubt in his truth. So if I said he claims he spent, my brother would turn and look at me and say, well, thanks a lot. That's not very loyal. Also, if you say this individual when the person is standing beside you, this can be very insulting because it's not a very pleasant word for this person or this man or this woman. Sometimes this phrase, this gentleman, it can be, depending on your tone of voice, slightly insulting, okay, if the person is standing beside you. So if somebody came to your office and you went to your manager and said, this individual wants to speak to you, that would sound really bad to us. So, and students are often surprised, okay. But as one of my students said on our online lesson on Tuesday, they said, well, you know, you could say you're a gentleman. That's a compliment. Yes, you're a gentleman is, but this gentleman, when the person has just arrived and is standing in front of you, no. If you say some guy was looking for you earlier, if the guy isn't present, then that's okay. Okay, now it's not the guy is the problem, believe it or not, some is the problem here. Yes, some can be a problem. So let's look at some examples. Hey Tom, there's some guy here looking for you. That is very rude if the man is standing there listening to you. The word some, well, the guy doesn't help obviously, but it's some that causes the offense. So students are often surprised when the word some can cause offense, and they'd be shocked usually to hear that. Hey Tom, there's a man here looking for you is fairly polite, and hey Tom, there's someone here to see you, that's most polite. Okay, you'll excuse me, I used a capital here after the comma. There shouldn't be, but I'm not going to change it now. I don't understand. I don't understand is a common phrase. I don't understand you means there's something wrong with you. So if you add the word you, it suggests that there's a problem with the person that's speaking. There's a problem with their character, there's a problem with their mentality, something like that. So sometimes husbands will hear that a lot from their wives. I understand you is I have a close connection with you and empathy. Okay. Now some student questions came in during the last online lesson, and someone says I would like to instead of I would have to. Now this was in connection with our slide on tables, as our slides on the concession, and I suppose we could go back up here to address this here. You'd say I would have to say that and I would like to say that. So here when you say while I appreciate that blah blah, I would like to say that or I would have to say that, and yes, we did say there's a difference between those two. What is the difference? Well, in general English, if you say I would like to, that's desire, and I would have to is hypothetical obligation. And this can be added to these phrases up here, this logic, to say that if you're negotiating and you think that maybe the person doesn't agree with you and you're trying to convince them of your point of view, you could change this one, I would have to say that, okay? You could change this one over and we could say I would like to say that. Okay. Here, if you're just giving your straight opinion and you're going to say something slightly negative, you might say I would have to say that. So while I appreciate that the restaurant had just opened the night before, I would have to say that the service was very poor. Okay. You could use something like that. Okay, let's go back down to the rest of the notes. Some other questions from the students. Hi JJ, could you please give any advice on how to improve spelling? Do you know what? Speaking in general? No, that. Any tip will help. Well, if I was to give you one tip about spelling, it is to pay attention to patterns. When you're looking at words, pay attention to patterns. So if you see that cat turns to Kate with the E, then hat turns to hate with the E. If you've got bigger words like psychological, pathological, sociological, pay attention to the logical at the end. Learn how to spell that, and now you know how to spell half of lots of other words. Okay. Some of the suggestions from the rest of the class online that came in from all around the world were use subtitles on TV. Yes, when you're watching TV or Netflix or Amazon Prime or YouTube, turn on the subtitles. Don't forget, however, that the auto-generated subtitles are still a work in progress. They are not fully accurate on YouTube. So if the language is very idiomatic or has strong accents or might be from a movie with a lot of ambient noise, then you may only get 60% accuracy. That means 40% is complete mumbo jumbo. So be careful about that. But the subtitles you get on Netflix and Amazon Prime and those kind of things are usually written in, or your TV, they're usually written in by a professional. So more or less there'll be a very high level of accuracy there. Another suggestion from some of the words, they said try to write the word you want to spell. Also, very good idea, very good idea. And another student suggested write it out a number of times, and that's old school. There's no school like the old school. Okay, that's an old idea, but it's still a good idea. It will help you improve. Then we were talking about phlegm and phlegmatic, how these are both words that have strange spelling and completely different pronunciation. And I promised I'd put in Dan Quayle's video on couldn't spell potatoes. So we said that Dan Quayle was a US vice presidential candidate. He was running for election, and he was visiting a school, and in the US, schools are very focused on spelling. And one of the children, who might have been maybe 10 or 11, was at the blackboard, and he was writing up the word potatoes, and Dan Quayle very foolishly just made a silly mistake and corrected the child and said, nope, you've got potatoes is spelled like that, and Dan Quayle spelled potatoes like that. And it was always thought that Dan Quayle was stupid afterwards. If he can't spell potatoes, how could he be vice president and maybe one day president of the United States? And to this day, you can see that video on YouTube. It's still a very famous video. So just put in Dan Quayle and potatoes and you'll see it yourself. Then circumspection came up. Circumspection is one of the key aspects of politeness in English. Okay, we often just make sentences more polite. We add more sugar by just making them longer. They go round and round and round. So if I want one of my kids to give me a cookie, I'll say, give me a cookie. I'll make it really short because we know each other. But if I want to ask the Ryanair flight attendant for something, I'd say, sorry to bother you. Do you think it would be possible for me to get another cookie, if that would be okay? We'll make it a lot longer because I'm afraid of the Ryanair stewardess and their flight attendant. Okay, and one curiosity that came up in class was what word from Russian is often used for cafe, if we want another word for cafe nowadays in modern life. And of course we had some Russian speakers who very quickly told us it's bistro, which means quickly. And bistro was the first fast food restaurant because some of the Russian mercenaries or soldiers that were stationed in Paris during the Napoleonic era always wanted to get their food served quickly. They hated waiting around because the French restaurants were so elegant and they did things with a lot of detail, but the Russian soldiers were a little bit impatient with all of this elegant cooking, and they just wanted to get some food and go drinking and have some fun. And they used to bang the counter and say bistro, which means faster. And the clever Parisian restaurateurs started putting the word bistro outside to encourage these great customers to come in. So that's where we get the word bistro from. This is a sentence that came up from one of the students. He was asking me if it was okay. It was fine. And then we talked about some of his issues there. That's all really fine. The only other thing I'd add here that's really important is this verb, tweak. Tweak means to change very slightly. It's tweak, tweaked, tweaked, tweaking. Okay? That's a verb, and it means to change very slightly. If you work in a laboratory, if you work in engineering, if you work anywhere really, and you have to change something very slightly, we said we can tweak it a little. Let's tweak it a little. So if you're working in marketing and you're presenting some sort of pitch, or if you're presenting a presentation, your boss might say, I think we should tweak it a little. He's using the word tweak because he doesn't want to offend you, because he's not going to say change, but you understand that it means change. Okay, and then this form from that was just talking about the differences in spelling of words which are not connected really. So they're all our notes from Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. That's all for me. The very best of luck, and I'll see you